Hey, I'm Jimmy. In this video, I'm going to go through Boeing to see if Boeing stock is a good investment after the plane crashes that were caused by the 737 MAX's issues. So a few months back, I did a more fundamental analysis of Boeing stock, looking at things like their revenue, their earnings per share, and then we came up with a valuation based on a discounted cash flow method. This video is intended to be an update on that video since, well, a lot has changed since then. So, for those who haven't heard, two of Boeing's planes went down, one back in October and one in early March. And it was Boeing's fault. It turned out to be a software issue or something along those lines. And this is a chart of Boeing stock over the past year. And the first crash happened right here, and the second one right about here. And understandably so, the stock has gotten hammered for it. So these black swan events are very tricky for us investors. And just so we're all on the same page, a black swan event is an event that happens outside of normal expectations. And most importantly, for us investors, it's very difficult to predict. And this prediction problem, well, that's key because, well, plane trouble or even plane crashes, although they're rare, they happen. But when we project out earnings or revenue or free cash flow, whatever it might be, this is almost an impossible event to predict. So, as investors, let's imagine that we own the stock already, we're thinking about buying it. Well, we want to look at this type of event and see, does the drop in the stock price bring it to somewhere near fair value, or does it present an opportunity for us to jump in at perhaps a better value? So I believe the first thing we should do when looking at this type of event, or any black swan event, is to try to consider the impact that this is going to have on the company, in this case, Boeing. So if we try to logic this one out, well, in my mind, the first thought that I have is that who's likely to be most affected by this is airlines. In theory, well, these planes have been grounded, all of the Boeing planes, the 737 MAX planes, they're being grounded, and you would think that would hurt airlines the most since it's them who can't sell tickets right now. So for the Boeing B737 MAX, well, Boeing delivered 31 of them to Southwest Airlines and 22 to American Airlines, and then a handful of other companies, but those are the two biggest. So I can imagine in the short term, this is going to be a bigger problem for them than it might be for Boeing. Another point to consider, another aspect to consider is perhaps the suppliers for Boeing. If Boeing slows production, which I've heard they have, or they were to stop production altogether, well, I would imagine that would really hurt the suppliers to Boeing. So that might be something to consider when we're looking at the industry as a whole and who could get affected by this. But now let's try to pay attention to the impact on Boeing themselves. So there's some obvious impacts in my point of view. So I recently saw that a lawsuit was filed against Boeing, and I think this is the first one, but if it is the first one, there's going to be a whole bunch of them coming forward. But I doubt it's likely going to be a real problem for Boeing's stock, since that's likely to be a one-time hit to the company. I think the bigger concern is there a hit to the brand? Although I'm not sure it is going to have a sustained impact or a negative impact on Boeing's brand. As an example, it recently came out that Garuda Airlines, which had placed an order for 49 Boeing 737 MAXs, well, they're looking to cancel that order. But when they were asked what plane they would switch to, well, it seems that there's a strong possibility that they're simply going to switch to a different Boeing airplane. So if a bunch of companies were to do that, well, then Boeing really doesn't get hurt, because all that ends up happening is that their orders get shifted around to other airplanes. So when I heard this actually brought me over to margins. And it turns out that the Boeing MAX 737 is one of the best margin planes that Boeing has. So if orders did start shifting away from that plane to other planes, perhaps lower margin planes, which would be more likely, then that would throw off the business. It would throw off margins, and that could be cause for a problem for valuations of the company, which are based on current level of margins, or at least expected margins. Now, in our last Boeing video, I talked about the backlog of orders that Boeing had, and the concept of a backlog of orders should make it easy to predict revenue and predict free cash flow. So Boeing had more than 4,500 orders in their backlog, and almost 80% of them are with the 737 MAX. So a company like Southwest, which I mentioned before, well, they ordered about 280 planes. So obviously, if they were to ever switch that order to less profitable planes, then that would hurt Boeing. Or if they canceled those orders altogether, well, then that would hurt revenue, and profits. Or worst case scenario, they cancel that order and then they jump ship and they go over to Airbus. And that would be the biggest problem, because to me, that would be the biggest indicator of a brand issue. So before I look at how this could affect the real numbers of Boeing, I just want to bring out a point that I came across when I was doing my research for Boeing. And this chart right here, this chart was put out by, it's called the Air Current. And I haven't verified the numbers on this chart yet. Typically, I like to do that if I'm going to make any big decisions on it. So you may want to do something like that if you're interested in relying on this data. And basically, the easiest way to do that is to simply spot check the data. So maybe you look at this point or this point or this point, and then you pull down the company's filings and you compare to see if these numbers match. These are all in the company's 10K, or at least they're very, very close. So that's what I would do if I was going to make a big decision with that. And I bring that out because what's most impressive to me about this chart is look at how volatile Boeing's deliveries are. This is the amount of planes that they deliver each year. Look at how volatile their deliveries are compared to Airbus. So I can't help but wonder when I look at this, how is Airbus so steady and Boeing is frankly all over the place? That being said, is Airbus the best possible investment? So if you're interested in an Airbus analysis, let me know. Maybe I could do something like that. I think that might be interesting. I've never actually really dug too deeply on Airbus's stock. So let me know in the comments below if you think that's something I should do. Okay, now let's look at the real numbers for Boeing, and ultimately, let's try to see what we can do for Boeing stock. So in the last video that I did, which was before the third quarter of 2018 was announced, it was September of 2018, well, this is what their free cash flow valuation looked like. So we used a weighted average cost of capital of 9.5%. We used a perpetual growth rate of 2.5%, and this gave us a fair value of Boeing stock of $392. And at the time, Boeing stock was trading at about $360 per share. So now that we have the benefit of hindsight and we could see the chart, we could see how it actually played out, well, this is where we did our analysis. And as we could see, according to our calculation, the fair value of the stock was about $392 per share. And you could see that early on, it looked like we made a great call and we thought it would be a good thing. It should be valued. In fact, it almost got to our fair value early on. I think it stopped about $1 or $2 short. But then the stock began to decline. And don't forget, the plane crash happened right about here. Now, if we had done our Boeing stock analysis back then, well, then at this point, at the $310 level, assuming we come up with the same valuation, suddenly it looks like a much better value. Then at that point, the stock begins to run. And if we had bought it earlier, if we even bought it when we did our 360 analysis, when the stock was back at 360, well, perhaps when it gets up here, it looks overvalued. And if it did, maybe we take our stock and we sell it off at that point. And if you did that, congrats, great move. I didn't do that. I actually didn't own any of Boeing stock. And I probably wouldn't have bought it back then anyways, because I'm not sure there was enough of a margin of safety to get involved with the whole thing. When we did our analysis at 360, well, the $392 fair value that we had calculated, well, that's only about 10% higher. That's not that big. For me, I'd like to see something more than that. So what about now? Well, this is the free cash flow numbers back when we did our calculation the first time. On that date, these are the free cash flow numbers that we had used. Well, since then, 2018 numbers have been reported, and it came in at about, free cash flow came in at about $13.6 billion compared to our estimates at that time of about $13.5 billion. And that's pretty good. I'll take a small deviation from estimates almost any time, even if it's higher or lower. Now, it came out better than expected, so that's obviously a better thing. But even if it came out a bit short, I'm okay with that. What I'm after is the trend. And as we can see, clearly the trend here looks to be a positive one. So now, what do we think is going to happen going forward? And this is the way free cash flow is expected to shake out over the next few years. And in Boeing's case, it turns out that free cash flow is actually expected to be better now than it was 6 months ago when we first analyzed it. So for these numbers, I just use analyst expectations. These aren't my numbers. And what I did is I just took the average of any analyst expectations I could find. So for 2019, that's based on 15 different analysts. These are the average free cash flow projections. I figure that a group of analysts could probably predict better than I could. That being said, considering I'm looking at these investments as a long-term investment, any changes I would have made would have been fairly minor from year to year. So again, it's the overall trend we care about. So don't feel bad if you just want to use analyst projections. Take what estimates are and use that. That should work just fine. But now I want to bring out something real quick about investing in general. So look at how minor the shifts were in free cash flow since we did our last analysis, which was about the middle of September, and that was more than 6 months ago. So now look at what happens to Boeing stock during that very same time period from the arrow forward. So we could have easily put Boeing on a watch list and decided that we were going to wait for our margin of safety. So let's pretend that our margin of safety, we want at least a 25% upside. So we will only buy Boeing stock, or any stock for that matter, if it's 25% or more on the upside before it gets to our calculated intrinsic value. Intrinsic value and fair value are the same thing. So in order to have had a 25% upside, we would have had to have bought Boeing stock around $313 a share. And I bring this out because instead of watching the stock chart every day to determine if we're right or wrong, and what if we would have watched this chart instead? It's going to be a much slower chart to watch the movements happen. You just update it whenever you get new numbers, but it's going to be much easier to bear. Now, if we were watching this free cash flow chart and perhaps the shift started to happen in the other direction, maybe the chart starts looking like this. So if this happens, well, as the stock approaches our potential entry point of, call it about $313, well, we might have to reconsider if this is the way free cash flow is now being projected, because it's easy to jump in at 313 when the projected free cash flow is moving higher. But when it moves lower, well, that might give us reason to pause. So hopefully if you got the opportunity and you did buy it, hopefully down low and you're able to, it's up fairly good for you, and that's great. But if you didn't, and perhaps you're watching this video because you want to see if we should buy Boeing stock, well, now let's update our discounted cash flow numbers to see if we can come up with a fair value for Boeing stock. So I added in a new number to this table, and now we added 2022, and I'm going to use the very same weighted average cost of capital and the very same perpetual growth rate. Now, you might make the case that the cost of capital could rise if, in theory, the volatility was a bit higher, beta was a bit higher. That could affect that. I have a whole bunch of videos on that topic coming up with free cash flow or using the capital asset pricing model. If you're interested in that, there's videos in the link in the description below. Now, using the updated free cash flow numbers, now we get a fair value of $447 per share. But we can't stop there. We have to be careful. We have to make sure we update everything. And shares outstanding have changed thanks to Boeing's stock buyback program. Now their shares outstanding are down to 565 million. So now we take today's value divided by the new shares outstanding, and our fair value jumps from $447 a share to $454 a share. So now switching back to the chart for a second, now our calculated fair value is up here. And I would also make the case that the business itself is a bit riskier since we're not sure how all this is going to play out just yet. And if we believe analyst estimates, then perhaps this makes sense. But we might have also considered upping the weighted average cost of capital because in theory things were a bit riskier. And if they were, increasing the weighted average cost of capital would have decreased the fair value. That being said, it might make sense to look at this if we trust it. If not, maybe we jump over to Airbus and do that analysis. If you think that's something you'd be interested in, let me know. If not, what do you think? Is Boeing stock worth a buy here? Yes, it dipped down, but did it dip far enough? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you for sticking with me all the way to the end of the video. If you haven't done so yet, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.